The Lord reveals his omnipotence to Job. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements, or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy, or who shut in the sea with doors, when it burst forth and issued from the womb, when I made the clouds its garment? Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? Have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depths? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the breadth of all the earth? Tell me, if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? Do you know it because you were born then, or because the number of your days is great? Have you entered the treasury of snow, or have you seen the treasury of hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? By what way is light diffused, or the east wind scattered over the earth? Who has divided a channel for the overflowing water, or a path for the thunderbolt, to cause it to rain on a land where there is no one, a wilderness in which there is no man, to satisfy the desolate waste, and cause to spring forth the growth of tender grass? Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades, or loose the belt of Orion? Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season, or can you guide the great bear with its cubs? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that an abundance of water may cover you? Can you send out lightnings, that they may go? Or who has put wisdom in the mind, or who has given the understanding to the heart? Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions? Do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear young? Or can you mark when the deer gives birth? Can you number the months that they fulfill? Or do you know the time when they bear young? They bow down, they bring forth their young. Who set the wild donkey free, or loosed the bonds of the onega? Will the wild ox be willing to serve you? The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but she treats her young harshly as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without concern, because God deprived her of wisdom and did not endow her with understanding. Have you given the horse strength? Can you frighten him like a locust? Does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest on high? From there it spies out the prey its eyes observe from afar. Its young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there it is.
This past Wednesday, I took part in a graveside service along with Pastor Rick from New Winchester Church. And the ashes of a longtime Canaan friend here were laid to rest, and it was really a delay, not uncommon, since January, really. And it was low-key and it was real. But apparently, these events are becoming more and more rare. I learned that Pastor Rick over there is also a hospice chaplain, and he said that in his circle of care that they had 40 deaths a month over the winter. 40 a month. I wouldn't be surprising anyone if I said that COVID played a large part in it, but not only in the deaths, but in the complications of trying to get closure on those losses. And as we were talking, he was explaining to me that more and more people are choosing cremation, which is understandable in these times. But in this whole era of social restrictions, what's happening is people are saying, we're planning a memorial later on. He says, but you know what? The later on just isn't coming. More and more people have no kind of closure to that grief that they feel. And so the effect, he says, he's finding is that you have this unaddressed grief going on and this lack of closure, and that there's this real uptick in the need for counseling of not just the families, but the staff who are trying to deal with the families. It's kind of an amazing thing. And as he's going on and explaining a lot of this, his insights made me think of all things lightning, because if you know how lightning works, there's a build-up in potential, a build-up in tension electrically, and then that stress is released in the bolt of the lightning. However, if you know this about lightning, if that potential has nowhere to go, things get real nasty, because it'll make a place to go, and it's usually going to blow up someone or something. It's the way that lightning works. However, just ground whatever the object is, and the effect, it has a path now to travel, and the effect can be minimal. And just thinking of that made me think of, especially out in the country, a lot of times we have the lightning rods on the roofs, and they go down to a grounding plate on the earth, and all that electrical tension has a place to travel through there. And reality, and that's where we are. You heard this long thing on animals and all of this, and you're going, well, that's interesting. But what's it got to do with anything? Because as far as I know, nobody here owns an ostrich. Could be wrong. So what is this all about? Well, this is God's reply to Job. It took us 37 chapters to get there. So here we are in chapter 38 now. And reality is what it's all about. And reality is a lot like lightning. I'm talking everything, the whole thing of existence here. And the more challenging the realities we have to face, and I know some in here are facing some pretty big challenges in their realities right now, the stronger, the more electrical potential, if you will, in the reality we're facing, it's a shock to the body, it's a shock to the mind, it's a shock to the soul. And just to kind of give an example of how much that can be, I wanted to share some conclusions from a research article on millennials. And no, we're not picking on millennials. Jordy, you guys don't have to leave or anything. You can stay here. No, the reason we're mentioning millennials is because as you look at them, they're in the peak, in the heat of life. They're in the peak of things. And if life should ever be moving, you would expect it to be moving at that point in life. But here is something that is shared from a social research article. Millennials are experiencing a, quote, health shock, largely fueled by a decline in mental health. Depression and, quote, deaths of despair are also on the rise among millennials. It is linked to money stress, loneliness, and burnout in and out of the workplace. Nearly half of all millennials have left a job for mental health reasons. Now that's them, but that's all of us, isn't it? Is that we have the stress of money, we have the void of loneliness, we have the tension of burnout, we have the buildup of unresolved losses. All of them are bolts of reality that strike like lightning. Now, lightning rods work by connecting a given point to a reality greater than the lightning, i.e., it's grounded to the planet itself, right? But here's the thing. Even though the planet is without a doubt the greater reality, lightning's pretty real, but the planet is a bigger and greater reality than the lightning. To ground something to the earth is completely useless unless you've got the rod actually grounded to that greater reality, that you actually have this cable that's heavy gauge, continuous, running from the rod all the way down to the earth. Lightning is a reality. The earth is a greater reality. This greater reality does you no good unless the two are connected, unless you are grounded in that greater reality. Here's the parallel I'm going for, is that reality is a great thing that we live in. I mean, it's a huge question. What is life, right? We look at the wounds, we look at what we're supposed to do, all of this, and we try and ground ourselves into something, and the goal is to have the wisdom to understand what you should be grounded in. Just like the lightning rod. You know, there's Kev, you go home and you ground the lightning rod into your wife, that's not so good. It won't work. Vicky's nodding. She agrees. You need to be grounded into something greater than the lightning, which is the earth. So the same in life. If life is a great reality, like a bolt of lightning sometimes, what do we ground ourselves in, really? What do we ground ourselves in? It becomes a very intentional thing. People ground themselves into all kinds of things. You might ground yourself into relative truth. That's pretty popular these days, but it's not a greater reality. You might ground yourself into cultural opinions and beliefs. There's, as you guys were talking about the internet, we talked about the rabbit hole. Man, you can find all kinds of stuff you should be believing according to popular belief. But you know what? All that stuff will melt in the face of the challenges life can throw at you. You could ground yourself in the hope of your health. Everybody wants health. Pam's saying, nope, don't work. How about human faith? Oh, we need to have faith. Sure. Human effort, we need to try. Human intelligence, we've got to think. But they are not the greater reality. I guarantee you, they will fall away. They will be shredded by what reality can do to them. Point in case, think of 2020. How many things did we try and they really didn't work? The only power greater than reality is what created reality in the first place. Funny thing about that, the Bible has a verse about that. Colossians 1:15 through 17. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. Here's a mind bender for you. You can't understand that it doesn't even come into your radar unless God himself reveals it to you. But let's say he has. Let's say you understand that verse and you know, if I'm going to be grounded in something, that's the greater reality. Well, even if God is a greater reality, you know what? He's of no use to you at all, as great as he is, if there's no grounding cable. You have to be connected in some way, a grounding cable. What could that cable be if we're speaking metaphorically? I'm going to throw out a word that I don't think you would have guessed it would be, is authenticity. Authenticity. Let me propose something to you for life to be healthy, for life to be abundant. The challenges of reality must be met by an even greater authenticity. Whatever life's throwing at you, we have a word, right? That phrase, the poopy's getting real, right? Well, you need something more real than that. Something of greater authenticity. Hence, the harder the reality, the more authentic the grounding must be. And really, for all the deer and ostriches and everything that we were reading in that text from God, it is actually talking about this greater reality that you can ground yourself in. Like the growing trend in funerals or the deep struggles young people go through, Job has been struck through all these chapters by a reality like a bolt of lightning. And Job is an upright man, and Job is a man of faith. But for all his faith, he is melting in the face of this greater reality. Well, Job seems to be doing everything right. What can be more than that? And I think we're going to find it comes down to this cable, this direct and authentic encounter with God Himself is what's going to change things. And that's exactly what happens, because did you catch this as the chapter starts off? It's not talking to anyone else that we've covered so far. God answers who? Job. It's Job alone who is having this encounter. Now, please don't take this as a trite question, but have you ever had an encounter with God that was so real, that even if today you said, if I question all this other stuff that went on, I would never question that. It is that irrefutable. That type of encounter. Now, I'd be willing to wager this, is that if you have, and I hope you have, and I pray you will, is that encounter came about in a time of challenge. Life had thrown you a lightning bolt of some type. And God answered through the whirlwind. A lot of times when God makes that authentic encounter, it will be in a time of challenge. I want to go on in how he dealt with this grounding, because this is God's first step. This is the way we're approaching these two chapters. This is God's first step in grounding Job and laying the cable between Job and the greater reality. He's about to ground Job into divine authenticity, what's really, really real. And it's got to be God's wisdom, because the way God approaches this is not the way I would approach it, and the way I think a lot of us in here would not. Because if we went and we saw Job suffering, we'd want to be nice. We'd want to be comforting, and it's a good thing. But God's approach to this, when he comes to suffering Job and he wants to ground him in reality, is not to be the, quote, loving God or the, quote, nice God. What he does in the depths of suffering is start asking Job very challenging questions. He starts by asking these challenging questions. And like all the stuff with God, how Job addresses them, how Job answers them, is only as good as the honesty by which he does it. Kind of like us sitting here. If God brings you a question on your heart, it doesn't mean anything beyond the honesty by which you will reflect on what that is. So that's where he is. But what's interesting in this, if you break it down, and I turned into Beth Struby, of all people, I go like this because these are friends, is that if you look at Beth Struby's Bible, it was like, she didn't highlight here, and it was all highlighted. The entire Bible was highlighted, but it was color-coded, as all these different things. And so that's what I did. I went in and I looked at the chapters, and I highlighted for myself, I didn't put it up here, in one color for the question and another color for what the question was about. What I found was this, is that there are 4 basic questions through these 2 chapters, and it's just a variation of how God was asking that particular question. So, what I take from that is this, is that these 4 questions are a way for us to ground into authenticity. If we're real with the questions will make us real. If we're real with the questions, it will make God real. Those 4 questions are this: where were you? Do you know? Can you? Then who? Where were you? Do you know? Can you? Then who? Well, let's just break them down a little bit here. Where were you? Now, that's an interesting question because it's not just a question of place, it's a question of time, isn't it? When you ask, where were you? Now, in the distant past, God, in this whole dissertation he's giving, he points out that he was laying down the foundations of the earth. Where were you, Job? He was creating and separating the darkness from the light. Did you even see this happening? Was he there when the cosmos was being set into place? Did he watch God do those things that God does? We have a number of sciences. We have paleontology, right? And that's the study of where life came from on the planet. You have cosmology, which blows my mind. Where did the universe come from? And there's great theories, and Pastor Chris can explain them all. We'll have him come up here and do a whole thing on the fractal universe. But the truth is, even for the smart guys like Pastor Chris and all his scientific cohorts, they will admit, they will concede that it's all based on evidence. Numeric, fossils, everything, but it's based on evidence. And with evidence, the best you can do is come up with a theory. The fact is, we weren't really there. I kind of smile because I have a background a bit in that too, and I kind of smile when I look at these ironclad theories out there, and it makes me think back that 200 years ago people had ironclad theories, and we just kind of chuckle at them now. I wonder how many things 200 years from now people will be laughing at what we think is real. Because quite simply, we weren't there. We can't really say. So it's not only space, it's also chronology. God asks this. He says, have you commanded the morning since your days began? How about you, Ashley? Have you commanded the sun to come up ever since you were around? No. No. Sometimes because she works at night, though, you do actually hate to see the sun coming up. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and can you cause the dawn to know its place? In the full scheme of things, each of us has only been here for a flash of a point of time. How much do we really understand anyway? Based on the amount of time we've been on this earth, how much do we really understand? Got me thinking of a little scenario. Consider this. Some of you are relatively new to Canaan. You have an impression of the place. You've been in and out the doors. And we could take a survey, and I could say, why do you think God put Canaan on this planet? And you would maybe have a very interesting answer. It'd be interesting to think of what you might say. Some of us in here are oldie goldies. We've been around for a long time in this place, decades. If I were to ask those people the same question, I would expect their answer might be a little richer, a little more inclusive, a little more embrace, a little more in perspective. They've watched for a long time. But imagine this. Imagine if God allowed, maybe kind of like Highlander or something, He allowed somebody who laid the first timbers, the very first foundational whatever in the old sanctuary over there, and they were allowed to remain a living member of Canaan to this very day. Imagine all that they would have seen. They would have known this place when it was a bunch of Civil War veterans, people who survived the epidemics of typhoid and cholera, to now the people that sit in here now who are from the digital age and commute by computer and now wear masks for the epidemic of a virus that was unknown in that time. Just imagine what perspective that person might have. Can you imagine getting a chance to ask somebody who was the very first member of this church, why do you think God put this church on this planet? I would hope that, and I would expect that it'd be a really interesting answer. The perspective would be really something from that larger person in that case. Well, let's expand that a billionfold. What is the perspective of an infinite mind who has been watching things here before there even was a here? What's God's perspective? This is the mind that asks, okay, you think you're so smart, where were you? How much do you really know? How much have you really seen? Man, we kind of shrink in our perspective of where we sit in this whole thing. Where were you? Maybe not knowing as much as I think, which is the second question, do you know? And in the Hebrew, we've looked at this a few times, but in the Hebrew mind, to say, do you know, wasn't just to know. It's not just, but includes, do you perceive, do you discern, do you understand? But not just do you understand, have you experienced the reality of what you now understand? It goes a long way in that respect. Do you perceive the measurements of creation? How big is the universe? Why is the earth the size it is? Does it have to be that size? Why did God choose that measurement? Do you understand why those measurements apply? Do you understand the nature of matter? How about the boundaries of hydrology or the algorithms of weather or the cosmic forces of the solar system or the workings of genetic replication or the programming of instinct or how the human mind or heart works or how creation in itself just works? In effect, those two chapters were simply those questions. Do you know that stuff? Well, here, let me show you. I put this in because it reminded me that I'm not all that smart. It was a little bit of an article from a science magazine, just a little tidbit. And it goes like this. The bottom line is the quantum world. And it just doesn't work in the way the world around us works, says David Lindy. We don't really have the concepts to deal with it, he says. Here's a taste of that weirdness. In experiments, particles in the subatomic world sometimes travel like waves, and they sometimes travel like particles. Why the tiniest laws of nature work that way isn't clear. The problem, it turns out, is not limited to photons. It extends to electrons and protons and other particles as smaller than the atom. Every elementary particle has properties of both a wave and a particle. The idea is called a wave-particle duality. It's one of the biggest mysteries in the studies of the smallest parts of the universe, that the field, in the field known as quantum physics. We don't even know how everything fits together. How about this? Consider this. If we looked into a single blade of grass, just one blade of grass, one not even blowing in the wind, would we realize that there's a flurry of activity that's going on in this blade of grass? There are chemicals that are turning solar energy into biological energy. There's the replicating proteins of DNA and a strange wave particle interplay between the very elements of the matter. We can't perceive what's going on in a single simple blade of grass, let alone an entire planet, let alone the cosmos. How little you and I are actually aware of at any given moment. And yet we love to expound. We love to give our grandiose observations on humanity and the global events all around us. 2020 taught us that too. Everybody was right on whatever their politics or whatever was supposed to be. Everybody's right on the virus. Well, maybe before we take ourselves too seriously, maybe we just need to stop and think about a simple blade of grass just standing still out there on your lawn. How much do you even really know about that? In this process of grounding us, this isn't to grind us down, this is to ground us. In the process of grounding us, God is asking us, let's start here. How much do you or I really know about anything? And it leads very nicely into the next question. Can you? Can you? Can you command the dawn to rise? Can you enter into those deep springs down in the bottom of the ocean? Can you open the doors of the afterlife? Can you peer inside there? Can you see into the future? Can you cause the rain to fall? Can you control the forces of nature? Can you cause, quote, to spring forth the growth of a tender grass? Can you get a single wild donkey to obey you? I should give that directly to Kitsy and Kevin on that one. What can you really control? 2020 taught us that pretty well too, didn't it? What did we really actually control? Now, the point of hitting us with these three questions is to really bring the fourth question. If your answer is not so much and all of these things, and you realize that, then who? Then who? The point of the whole thing, all of reality caters to some type of given order. Even if you bring up chaos, chaos is nothing more than very complicated order. If we honestly consider it, there must be a creative and a maintaining intelligence behind reality. You have to be either a fool, blind, or just clear nuts to not realize there must be some intelligent guide of order behind the whole thing. And so the question comes, then who? You might sit here and say, well, I don't know about your God. Well, okay, but there's something, there's someone, then who? And that's what God asks. And it's not just God. Reality demands the question. How come? Because reality is all around you. You can't get away from reality. And sometimes it's going to nail you with a bolt of lightning on something, and it's going to go, then who? Then who? That's God asking this question. Wow, God, you're pretty smart. These questions actually make sense. Proverbs 9, 10, and 12 says this. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Anybody know that one? Okay. How about the next line? And the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. How about going on? For by me your days will be multiplied, and years of life will be added to you. If you are wise for yourself. In other words, if you're wise, you're doing yourself a favor. And if you scoff, you will bear it alone. You will bear it alone. Fear, yirah, in that original thing, it does mean terror, but it also means some other things. It means awe. We started with the song Overwhelmed. What a beautiful choice. That's being in awe. Respect, profound respect or reverence. That's the fear of the Lord, and that's the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge is a whole other word. Da'ath, it can mean cunning, but it also means just being aware. And as we said, not just knowing something, but experiencing the very thing you know. Big words. The challenges of reality, they can strike like lightning. Wow, we've lost members in our extended family, grandparent age people, bing, bing, just like that within a month. We're not the only ones. Man, the grandkids, it's hit them like lightning. So many of us are there. What really matters then is, are you grounded? That lightning is going somewhere. That effect is going somewhere. But if we're grounded in a greater reality than the reality that just bolted us, we'll be okay. But are we grounded? Are we grounded? God says the authenticity of your spiritual walk will start with those questions. 2 chapters about donkeys and ostriches and lightning. But 4 questions came from them that will be the beginning of your authenticity. And the authenticity will ground you. He also says that if you are grounded in Him, there's the promise. If you are grounded in Him, the greater reality, your days will be multiplied. Your quality of life will be increased. Your gain of wisdom to benefit yourself will be increased. But if you blow it off, and guess what? Did you know that church people blow off the wisdom of God? Yeah, sometimes in some real subtle ways. But yeah, we can be pretty good about it. God says if we will, then you'll bear the consequences alone. There's a world out there. It's dying of stress, literally dying of stress. Disconnected, ungrounded. A culture that has reached the point that I've learned this week doesn't even know how to deal anymore with the very basic elemental thing of loss and the end of life. Hey, that's coming 100%. Better be grounded. Thing is, we don't have to be ungrounded. Just because you're in here doesn't mean this is a good start. It's just like getting a piece of the cable, but we don't have to be ungrounded. We can be grounded. Authenticity is a quest. Authenticity. If it's not real, it doesn't matter. Authenticity is a quest. And authenticity is also very intentional. It's something we have to focus to. Have you faced the questions God asks you? Have you faced them? I guarantee He's been asking you. When's the last time you would say you had a direct encounter with the person of God? Not just His Word, not just a good study. An encounter with the person of God. Are you intentionally striving for that type of connection? Here it comes. Are you even striving for that at this very minute, this very moment? Grounding is everything.